Hello and welcome to Fashion Bites. I'm Ellen Byerrum, author of The Screwball Noir, Crime of Fashion Mysteries, featuring Lacey Smithsonian, a fashion reporter in Washington, D.C., the city that fashion forgot. It is also the city that continues to give me ideas and characters and settings for my series. Welcome to Lacey Smithsonian's Washington, setting as character. I should note that I am not in Washington right now. We are filming in the garden today, but we are dodging certain hazards like the basketball game behind the fence, the helicopters in the air, and thunderstorms later. Because my books take place in Washington, D.C., the city and its surroundings act almost as other characters in the stories. Eudora Welty once said, "Every story would be another story and unrecognizable if it took up its characters and plot and happened someplace else." Fiction depends for its life on place. A writer imagines a story to be happening in a place that is rooted in his or her mind. Among the more enjoyable aspects of writing is research, finding out new things. Obviously, visiting locations is part of my research. I have to make sure that things haven't changed radically, and sometimes they have. A restaurant is no longer there. Old neighborhoods are torn down and a new one arises in its place. We previously visited Lacey's personal environs in Alexandria and parts of Virginia. In the second segment last week, we visited Farragut Square and DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C., where much of the action happens. Today, we are going to the Valhalla of tourists who visit our nation's capital. The National Mall is anchored by the Capitol to the east and the Lincoln Memorial to the west. In between are the museums. The mall is an area where you can separate the tourists from the local denizens by their clothing. Tourists like loud t-shirts and gym shoes and Bermuda shorts. Washingtonians prefer tailored clothes, even if they are sometimes a tad dowdy. Aren't you glad you don't have to put on your walking shoes while we enjoy a peek at the mall, the National Museum of American History, and the National Portrait Gallery? The Smithsonian Castle, the Capitol, the Art Museums, the Natural History Museum, and the American History Museum are familiar sights. Here is a brief section from Killer Hair describing D.C. in the springtime. It was a beautiful Wednesday in April, and there was a respite from the rain that had pounded the city into submission for the last 2 weeks. Cherry trees were exploding with blossoms, a pink snowstorm against a turquoise sky. On days like this, springtime in the capital city was a wanton green feast that wrapped itself around the heart. Every spring, D.C. was the scene of an invasion of curiously dressed tourists, shiny day-glow families, busloads of polyester grandparents, and entire high school classes wearing matching blue and orange neon t-shirts and baseball caps. You don't go to the National Mall to stay outside. You definitely want to go inside and see some of our country's treasures. And one of my favorite places, as well as Lacey's, is the National Museum of American History, which has a display of the First Lady's gowns. You can see how times change and fashions change, and how First Ladies' fashions move with the decades. This next segment is taken from Killer Hair, when Lacey is visiting the museum. In the National Museum of American History, Lacey was happily undisguised, anonymous, and free at last. First, she dropped in on her favorite display, the First Lady's gowns. Low lights illuminated the display cases to protect the ancient gowns from further deterioration. Tiny mannequins represented the diminutive early grand dames of the Capitol. Most of the older dresses were muted with age, rendered into barely discernible pastels. Lacey admired the heroic Dolly Madison, First Lady from 1809 to 1817, and her simple Empire period gown, delicately hand-embroidered with flowers, butterflies, and dragonflies. Lacey paused briefly to gaze at the exquisite creations worn by Frances Folsom Cleveland, who reigned in the White House from 1885 to 1889. Judging from her laced and beaded confections from Paris and Baltimore, Frances was quite the clothes horse. Poor Mamie Eisenhower, however, had been relegated to the distant past. Her famous Mamie pink dress was missing. The last glass case held the gowns of recent first wives from Jackie Kennedy on. The display was Lacey's favorite because the viewing public always seemed to feel free to comment as if they were intimate friends of the first ladies. "Oh, here's Barbara Bush in royal blue velvet and taffeta. I just love her," Lacey overheard one woman say. "She wore scazzy, you know." Women who could never dream of a designer gown of their own were surprisingly familiar with the artists who had fashioned garments for the women in the White House, and all without the help of the notes provided by the museum. Now, after your visit to the mall, you don't want to miss the National Portrait Gallery, which recently added the dramatic official portraits of Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. The Portrait Gallery is just a few blocks away between F Street and G Street. It's also close to the Spy Museum, which is definitely a museum for another day. Obviously, with all that walking, you're going to want to take a break at some point. And these following snippets are from sections of The Masque of the Red Dress, featuring the Kogod Courtyard. Pushkin was right. The National Portrait Gallery definitely beat a typical coffee shop for their meeting. Even better, it was public and the summer visitors and the school classes were out in force. They picked up cold sodas in the cafe and entered the majestic Kogod Courtyard at the center of the Portrait Gallery's massive stone building. The space was always a surprise, a retreat, a calm place to sit with a cup of coffee, ice cream, or even lunch. The wavy glass ceiling high above allowed the sun to shine through and kept the rain and snow out. Lacey spotted Will Zephron, the actor who bought the tuxedo at the theater sale. Still working in catering, he passed Lacey with a wink, carrying an enormous glass vase with dozens of long-stemmed red roses. She smiled at him, and he paused to give her a quick hug and to eye her companion before hurrying on, balancing his burden. More of these extravagant flower arrangements followed him. Tall tables were wrapped in burgundy cloth and tied with silver ribbons. Someone was spending a lot of money on this affair. Lacey finished her root beer and watched the party preparations, mentally adding up the costs. She came up with the grand sum of, yowza! Those Russians were rich, very rich. I don't know about you, but I wish I'd been invited to that party. That's it for our tour today. If you want to know more about me or my crime of fashion mysteries, check out my website at ellenbyerrum.com. If you like this video, please hit the like button and please subscribe to this channel. It's free and easy. All you have to do is hit the subscribe button. That way you won't miss any. And feel free to share this video with your friends. Laugh. Enjoy a moment. This isn't a secret society. And I'll see you next time. Bye.